The business class cabin shook violently through the dark night, red warning lights flashing like a panicked heartbeat. A woman sat silent in seat 14C, clutching a burned, blackened dog tag. Suddenly, military radio crackled through the speakers. "Kestrel 1, report in." The passenger cabin fell dead silent. The woman lifted the microphone, her deep voice echoing softly. Outside, an F-22 pilot choked up, gasping in shock. "Mom!" The entire sky froze in that single moment. Elena Ward stepped onto Flight 447 like she owned the world. 44 years old. Her long black hair cascaded in gentle waves over her shoulders. The wine-red silk dress hugged her frame perfectly, tailored to perfection with hand-stitched details that spoke of expensive taste. A thin designer coat draped elegantly over her arm, cashmere so soft it seemed to float. Diamond earrings caught the cabin light, throwing tiny rainbows across her cheekbones. She moved with purpose toward seat 14C in business class, every step measured and confident. Her leather handbag, Italian craftsmanship, swayed gently as she navigated the narrow aisle. The other passengers barely looked up from their phones and magazines, too absorbed in their own worlds to notice anything special. "Another rich housewife on vacation," muttered Harold Brennan, a balding businessman in 12A, adjusting his expensive Rolex, probably going to some spa resort in Colorado. These trophy wives are all the same. A young tech executive named Marcus Chen smirked from across the aisle, scrolling through quarterly reports on his MacBook Pro. These suburban princesses are everywhere on international flights. Designer everything. Zero substance. Bet she's never worked a day in her life. Elena settled into her leather seat, placing her small Hermes purse carefully in the overhead compartment. Her manicured fingers, painted in classic French tips, wrapped around something metallic hidden in her coat pocket. Something she kept carefully concealed from the curious eyes around her. The head flight attendant, Sarah Martinez, approached with a crystal champagne flute. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Ward," Elena replied softly, her voice carrying a subtle rasp that hinted at years of commanding attention in loud environments. "Just Elena is fine." As the massive Boeing 787 taxied down the runway, Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her neck. Beneath her silk Hermes scarf, a tarnished silver dog tag hung on a thin chain. Her thumb traced its worn edges. Like a rosary, she'd whispered prayers over 1,000 times. The metal was warm from her body heat, scarred from years of use. The engines roared to life with increasing intensity, lifting them smoothly into the Colorado night sky. Through her window, city lights of Denver faded into darkness below, replaced by an endless carpet of stars. 25 minutes into the flight, the aircraft trembled slightly. Warning lights flickered amber on the overhead passenger panel. Most passengers didn't notice, too absorbed in their entertainment screens showing the latest Hollywood blockbusters. But Elena's eyes snapped immediately to the control indicators near the flight attendant station. She leaned forward slightly, studying the amber lights with the intense focus of someone who'd spent years reading similar displays under life-or-death pressure. The cabin lights dimmed automatically for the overnight flight. Soft classical music began playing through the sound system. Around her, passengers were settling in for the long journey, some already pulling out neck pillows and eye masks. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Sarah asked, noticing Elena's unwavering concentration on the aircraft systems. "That communication status light," Elena said quietly, pointing to a specific amber indicator that most people would never notice. It's showing intermittent failure patterns, isn't it? And the navigation backup system seems to be cycling through redundancy checks. Harold Brennan's loud laughter cut through the cabin's peaceful atmosphere. "Lady, technical stuff is way above your pretty little head. Why don't you stick to your fashion magazines and leave the thinking to people who actually understand this stuff?" His seat companion, a middle-aged attorney named Robert Hayes, chuckled condescendingly. "Exactly right, Harold. These princess types think they know everything because they watched Top Gun once at a girls' night out. Probably thinks Tom Cruise actually flies those jets." Elena didn't respond immediately. She simply returned her attention to the window, fingers still rotating something beneath her scarf. The insults rolled off her like water. She'd heard worse from enemy combatants. But Sarah noticed something the arrogant men had completely missed. Elena's hands told a completely different story than her appearance suggested. Thick calluses marked her fingertips and palms, the kind that came from gripping metal flight controls for hours during high-stress situations. A faded scar ran along her left wrist, clearly surgical, and when she reached for her crystal water glass, Sarah glimpsed a military-issue pilot's chronograph on her wrist, worn and scratched from years of intensive use. "Interesting timepiece," Sarah said softly, nodding toward Elena's watch. Elena's smile was barely visible, but knowing. Old habits die hard. Later, flight attendant Sarah Martinez would tell investigators, "I've served thousands of passengers in my 12 years with the airline, but the way Elena studied those instrument panels, that wasn't casual curiosity. Those were the eyes of someone who'd lived with those systems every day, who depended on them to survive." At exactly 30,000 feet above the Colorado Rockies, everything changed in an instant. The aircraft's primary navigation system began displaying erratic readings, GPS coordinates jumping wildly across impossible locations. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp warning chime that echoed through the cabin like an alarm clock in the middle of the night. Captain Jim Reynolds, a 30-year veteran pilot, felt his blood pressure spike as every backup navigation system began failing simultaneously. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, frantically worked through emergency checklists. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds announced over the intercom, tension bleeding through his professionally calm voice, "we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation and communication equipment. Please remain in your seats with seat belts securely fastened while we work to resolve this issue. Flight attendants, prepare for possible turbulence." The cabin erupted in nervous chatter. Passengers looked around anxiously, some grabbing their cell phones to check for signals that wouldn't exist at this altitude. The gentle hum of conversation quickly escalated into worried murmurs and panicked whispers. Through the oval windows, massive shadows emerged from the cloud cover like prehistoric beasts rising from primordial mists. F-22 Raptors, 3 of them, sleek and menacing as sharks, closing in on the commercial airliner from different vectors. Their twin engines glowed like fallen stars against the black Colorado sky, afterburners painting orange streaks through the darkness. "Oh my God!" screamed Janet Morrison, a soccer mom from suburban Denver in seat 16B. "Military jets, we're being intercepted. This is like 9/11 all over again." Panic spread through the cabin like wildfire in dry grass. Children began crying, their frightened wails mixing with adult voices raised in fear. A retired teacher named William Foster shouted from the back about terrorist attacks. Several passengers started making frantic phone calls, though no cellular signals could penetrate the aircraft's altitude. "They're going to shoot us down!" yelled Harold Brennan, the businessman who'd mocked Elena earlier. His face had drained completely white, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is it. We're all going to die. I should have taken the train." His companion Robert Hayes was hyperventilating, loosening his expensive silk tie as if it were strangling him. "What did we do wrong? Why are they after us?" But Elena remained absolutely motionless in seat 14C. Her eyes locked onto the lead F-22, tracking its every movement with an intensity that seemed almost intimate, like she was reading the pilot's intentions through the aircraft's body language. The radio in the cockpit crackled with static interference. White noise filled the air. Then suddenly, a clear military frequency cut through the electronic chaos. "Unknown civilian aircraft bearing 270. This is Raptor Squadron. You have entered restricted military airspace without authorization. Respond immediately, or we will be forced to take defensive action." Captain Reynolds grabbed his radio with trembling hands. "Military aircraft. This is commercial flight 447 out of Denver International. We're experiencing complete navigation failure. Request immediate assistance returning to authorized flight corridors." Silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then another voice, younger, more urgent, with a slight tremor that suggested personal stakes. "Kestrel 1. Kestrel 1. Do you copy? If you're out there, we need you now. We've got electronic warfare signatures all over this sector." The entire cabin fell silent, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen from the air. Even the crying children seemed to sense that something profound was happening. Something that went beyond their understanding, but demanded their attention. "Who the hell is Kestrel 1? Whispered Marcus Chen, the tech executive. All his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Elena's hand moved to her dog tag, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turned white against the tanned skin of her fingers. For 30 seconds, that felt like 30 years. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The weight of decision pressed down on her like the G-forces she remembered from combat maneuvers. The lead F-22 was now flying parallel to their aircraft, close enough that passengers could see the pilot's helmet and oxygen mask through the aircraft's canopy. Close enough to see his head turning, searching the civilian aircraft's windows. Kestrel 1... The young pilot's voice came again. Desperate now. Professional composure cracking under emotional pressure. "Please respond if you're listening. We know you're out there. The electronic warfare signature. It's the same pattern from Kandahar province. You're the only one who's seen it before." Elena closed her eyes, taking what felt like the deepest breath of her entire life. In that moment, she was transported back 15 years, back to desert skies and enemy fire, back to the sound of her A-10G AU-8 Avenger cannon tearing through enemy positions to save American lives. Then she stood up. Every passenger in business class watched as she walked purposefully toward the flight attendant station. Her designer heels clicked against the cabin floor, the only sound in the entire aircraft besides the drone of engines. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd walked through much more dangerous situations. "Ma'am, you really need to return to your seat immediately," Sarah said nervously. But something in Elena's eyes made her step aside instead of insisting. Elena was already reaching for the emergency radio handset mounted near the galley. Her fingers moved across the frequency controls with practiced precision. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of radio communication. Adjusting settings like she'd done it every day for decades. Harold Brennan laughed hysterically, his fear manifesting as manic disbelief. "Now the princess thinks she's going to save us all." This is absolutely insane. Someone stop her before she makes everything worse. Elena lifted the black microphone to her lips. When she spoke, her entire voice was different, stronger, more commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Kestrel 1. Copy all. A teenager in seat 18F, traveling alone to visit his grandmother, later told CNN, when she picked up that radio, it was like watching Clark Kent step into a phone booth. She became someone completely different. Someone who belonged in that sky with those fighter jets. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Outside the aircraft window, the lead F-22 wobbled visibly in the air. The pilot clearly struggling to maintain controlled flight as shock overwhelmed his training. The radio crackled with a mixture of static and pure disbelief. No way. No freaking way. That voice. It can't be. Then, a voice that made Elena's eyes immediately fill with tears she'd been holding back for 15 years. Mom? M-O-M question mark, exclamation mark. The word hit the cabin like a physical shockwave. Passengers stared at Elena with expressions ranging from complete confusion to dawning amazement. Harold Brennan's mouth hung open so wide you could have parked a small aircraft inside it. Marcus Chen's MacBook Pro slid forgotten from his lap, clattering to the cabin floor. Through the window, they could see the F-22 pilot frantically maneuvering closer to the civilian aircraft, desperate to confirm what his ears had just told him was impossible. "Ethan," Elena whispered into the radio, her voice cracking with maternal emotion for the first time since boarding. "Baby, is that really you up there?" "Mother of God," came another pilot's voice over the radio frequency. Older, more experienced, filled with reverence that bordered on worship. "Kestrel 1 is alive. Kestrel 1 is actually alive." In the cockpit of the second F-22, Major Tom Harrison nearly lost control of his multi-million-dollar aircraft. His hands shook on the control stick as 15 years of suppressed memories came flooding back. His voice trembled as he transmitted, "Ma'am, this is Viper 2. Call sign Tom Harrison. You saved my life in Afghanistan. Grid reference 401-225. September 15th, 2010. When my A-10 went down behind enemy lines. You pulled me out of that valley while taking heavy ground fire." Elena's response was calm, professional, the voice of a commander who'd faced death so many times it had become routine. "Viper 2. I remember. Glad you made it home to your family. Now maintain formation discipline. We have civilians on board who don't need to see fighter jets dancing around their aircraft." But inside her chest, her heart was pounding like it hadn't pounded since her last combat mission over the Hindu Kush Mountains. "Ma'am," came a third voice, younger but equally reverent. "This is Lightning 3. Captain Jessica Rodriguez. Your required reading at the Air Force Academy. They teach your engagement at Musa Kala as the textbook example of close air support under impossible odds." The cabin had become a theater, with every passenger an audience member watching the most incredible performance of their lives. But this wasn't a performance. This was real. This was history unfolding at 30,000 feet. Elena keyed the microphone again. "All aircraft. Enough chatter. Ethan, report your squadron's tactical assessment of this situation." Through the window, passengers could see the lead F-22 pilot, Elena's son, gesturing with his hands as he spoke. His voice came through the radio with military precision, mixed with barely contained emotional overwhelm. "Mom, Jesus Christ, Mom! What are you doing on a civilian flight? We received reports of a potentially hijacked aircraft in this sector 45 minutes ago. Electronic warfare signatures consistent with hostile foreign interference. Navigation jamming patterns. We were ordered to intercept and, if necessary. He couldn't finish the sentence. Elena's voice cut through his distress like a surgical blade. Son, take a deep breath. Think like I taught you when you were 12 years old learning to fly my Cessna. What does your training tell you about this situation? Outside, all 3 F-22 Raptors had moved into a protective formation around Flight 447. The most advanced fighter jets in the world positioning themselves like steel guardian angels around the vulnerable civilian aircraft. Ma'am, came yet another voice, this one older, carrying the weight of command authority. This is Colonel Marcus Webb, Razor 1 Squadron Commander. I honestly can't believe it's really you. When we heard Kestrel 1 respond to our call, every pilot in the western United States knows that call sign. Elena closed her eyes, recognizing the voice immediately from a lifetime ago. Hello, Marcus. How's that shoulder I helped patch up in Kandahar? Fine, ma'am. Still works perfectly, thanks to you. Listen, the entire squadron's monitoring this frequency now. When word gets out that Kestrel 1 responded to a distress call, every pilot from here to the Pentagon is going to want confirmation. In the cabin, passengers sat in stunned silence that felt almost religious in its intensity. The businessman, Harold Brennan, was now pale as death, shrinking into his leather seat as if trying to disappear entirely. An elderly woman named Dorothy Chen whispered to her husband, "What's happening, Richard?" "Who is this woman?" Before he could answer, Ethan's voice filled the cabin with information that changed everything. "Mom, for everyone listening on this frequency, my mother is Captain Elena Ward, United States Air Force, retired. Call sign Kestrel 1. She flew a 10 Thunderbolt II ground attack aircraft for 8 years across 3 combat deployments. She has over 2,000 combat flight hours, 17 confirmed pilot rescues, and 43 successful close air support missions." A collective gasp went through the cabin like a wave. She retired after taking shrapnel while extracting 4 downed pilots, including me, from a Taliban stronghold in 2011. The doctors said the nerve damage in her left hand would prevent her from ever flying military aircraft again. Elena flexed her scarred left hand, the same hand that had gripped her wine glass so casually just hours before. But she didn't retire because of the injury, Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. She retired because she wanted to watch me graduate from high school without missing it for another deployment. She wanted to be at my Air Force Academy graduation ceremony. She wanted to see me get married someday. She wanted to be just my mom. Colonel Webb's voice joined the testimonial. Kestrel 1. You pulled my wingman Lieutenant Morrison out of a burning F-16 near Kandahar in 2009. I watched you land your A-10 Warthog on a contested airstrip while taking direct enemy fire. Small arms rounds bouncing off your titanium armor like rain. You taxied right up to his burning aircraft and helped carry him to safety. And my entire platoon at Forward Operating Base Chapman, added Captain Rodriguez. Phoenix 3 here. You provided close air support for 6 straight hours when we were surrounded and outnumbered 10-1. Never left station. Never abandoned us. Your cannon runs saved 37 American lives that day. Elena's voice remained steady and professional. Enough war stories, people. We have a current situation that requires resolution. Ethan, run full-spectrum analysis on this aircraft's navigation and communication systems. I'm detecting electronic interference patterns that are consistent with hostile electronic warfare jamming. Through the cockpit door, Captain Reynolds emerged, staring at Elena with the expression of a man who'd just witnessed a miracle. "Ma'am, are you really—" "Captain," Elena said with military efficiency, "your navigation system is being actively jammed by sophisticated electronic warfare equipment. This isn't mechanical failure or atmospheric interference. Someone with military-grade technology is deliberately trying to force your aircraft down in a specific location." Harold Brennan suddenly stood up, his voice shaking with embarrassment and disbelief. You're really a decorated combat pilot? All this time. I thought you were just some pampered. Elena turned to look at him directly. Her eyes held the kind of calm that only came from facing death repeatedly in combat, and emerging victorious every single time. "Some what, exactly?" she asked quietly. He sat back down without finishing his sentence. A journalist traveling in seat 22A later wrote for Time magazine, "I've covered wars in 4 countries and interviewed presidents and generals, but I've never seen anything like watching a suburban mom transform into a military legend at 30,000 feet. It was like watching mythology become reality right before my eyes." The transformation in the cabin was complete and irreversible. Word had begun spreading through the aircraft's onboard Wi-Fi system. Passengers frantically texting family members and posting social media updates about the incredible woman sitting quietly in seat 14C. But nobody approached her directly. Nobody asked for selfies or autographs, or tried to turn the moment into a cheap publicity opportunity. Elena Ward had earned something infinitely more valuable than celebrity status. She had earned the kind of profound respect that could only come from genuine heroism. The businessman Harold Brennan, who had mocked her technical knowledge and dismissed her as a pampered princess, now sat hunched forward in his leather seat. Every few minutes he would glance back toward Elena, clearly wanting to offer some kind of apology, but completely lacking the moral courage to face her directly after his earlier condescension. The tech executive Marcus Chen had closed his MacBook Pro entirely, abandoning his quarterly financial reports to stare out the window at the F-22 Raptors that had returned to escort their aircraft safely through the night sky. His earlier arrogance about suburban princesses with zero substance now seemed like the ignorant ramblings of a child. Near the back of the plane, parents were quietly explaining to their wide-eyed children what they had just witnessed. Words like hero and courage and sacrifice floated through the cabin in hushed, reverent whispers. Several teenagers were recording voice memos on their phones, trying to capture the historic moment for posterity. Elena simply returned to her window seat, picked up her paperback thriller novel, and continued reading where she had left off. To her, this was just another chapter in a life filled with extraordinary moments that she had never considered particularly remarkable. She had been dealing with life-or-death situations since before most of these passengers were even born. The head flight attendant Sarah Martinez approached carefully, carrying a handwritten note from the cockpit. Her hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the past hour. "Ma'am, Captain Reynolds asked me to give you this," Sarah said, her voice filled with newfound respect. Elena accepted the folded paper and read the captain's careful handwriting. "Ma'am, in 32 years of commercial aviation, I have never had a passenger single-handedly save my aircraft and everyone aboard. Thank you seems completely inadequate for what you accomplished tonight. Please know that every single person on this plane owes their life to your expertise and courage. You are welcome in my cockpit any time. Captain James Reynolds. Elena folded the note carefully and tucked it into her designer purse, right next to a small collection of similar letters she had received over the years from people whose lives she had touched. Gratitude from soldiers she had saved, from their families, from communities that had benefited from her service. As Flight 447 began its descent toward Denver International Airport, Ethan's voice crackled over the radio one final time. Mom, the entire squadron has requested permission to perform a formation flyby as you land. Show our respect and gratitude for your service. Elena smiled, pressing her face to the small oval window. Just don't showboat up there, Ethan Michael. And remember what I taught you about formation flying. It's about precision and discipline, not showing off for the crowd. Copy that, Mom. And hey, I love you. I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know. Harold Brennan finally found his courage. He stood up slowly, his face flushed red with genuine shame, and walked the few steps to Elena's seat. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his confidence completely deflated. Ma'am, I owe you a sincere apology for what I said earlier. My comments about technical matters being about you not understanding. I was completely wrong and out of line. You probably know more about aircraft systems than I'll ever learn in my entire lifetime. Elena looked up from her novel. Her expression was kind but firm, like a teacher addressing a student who had learned an important lesson. Apology accepted, Mr. Brennan. But maybe next time you'll remember not to judge someone's capabilities based on their appearance or their choice of clothing. He nodded vigorously, then practically fled back to his seat. Do you believe that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones sitting quietly in the corner? Comment, respect, if this story changed how you see the people around you. Flight 447 touched down safely at Denver International Airport at exactly 11:47 p.m. Mountain Time. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings with unusual quiet. The normal chatter and complaints about cramped seating and delayed luggage were completely absent. Instead, there was a sense of reverence, like people leaving a cathedral after witnessing something sacred. As passengers disembarked through the jet bridge, each one paused respectfully at Elena's row, not to ask for photographs or autographs, but simply to offer a nod of acknowledgement. Some whispered quiet thank you messages. Others simply met her eyes and smiled with genuine gratitude. The elderly woman, Dorothy Chen, stopped and gently squeezed Elena's hand. My husband served in Korea, she said softly. He would have been so proud to meet you. A middle-aged businessman from first class, someone who hadn't even witnessed the crisis directly, approached with tears in his eyes. Ma'am, my son is deployed in Afghanistan right now. Knowing there are people like you watching over our troops, it helps me sleep at night. The little girl, Lucy Morrison from Seat 20C, shyly approached, holding a crayon drawing she had created during the final hour of flight. It showed a large commercial airplane surrounded by smaller fighter jets, with the words, "Thank you, Supermom," written in purple crayon across a bright yellow sun. Elena knelt down to the child's eye level, her wine-red dress pooling gracefully around her. What's your name, sweetheart? Lucy. My mommy says you're a real superhero. Are you really a fighter pilot like in the movies? Elena's smile was warm and genuine. I used to fly military aircraft, yes, but now I'm retired. Now I'm just a mom, exactly like your mommy. Lucy threw her small arms around Elena's neck in an enthusiastic hug, then skipped back to her parents, who were watching with obvious emotion. Elena walked through the jet bridge, her designer heels clicking rhythmically on the metal flooring. At gate B-27, a familiar figure waited in full flight gear. Ethan Ward, 26 years old, tall and broad-shouldered like his father had been before his death in Iraq, rushed forward and swept his mother into a bear hug that lifted her completely off the ground. "Mom, I still can't believe you were on that exact flight. When I heard Kestrel 1 respond on the radio, I thought I was hallucinating from oxygen deprivation." "Language, Ethan Michael Ward," Elena scolded automatically, but she was laughing. "Your grandmother would wash your mouth out with soap." "Sorry, Mom. But seriously, what were the mathematical odds of you being on that specific aircraft at that exact moment?" Elena laughed, a sound that erased 20 years of worry lines from her face. "Your grandmother always said the Ward family has a supernatural talent for being in the wrong place at exactly the right time." Other passengers had gathered at a respectful distance, some taking discreet photographs of the reunion between the legendary pilot and her Air Force officer son. But their cameras captured something more than just a news story. They captured pure love. Never underestimate the quiet ones sitting in the corner. They might just save your life. And they definitely have the most incredible stories. If you believe in honoring our hidden heroes, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to SN Quiet Stories, where real people tell extraordinary true stories that deserve to be remembered. Because sometimes the most incredible adventures happen in Seat 14C.